glad you guys could all make it. It's always nice when, there's a bigger audience for the entrepreneur panel than there is the investor panel. So I love that. I think that's a good sign that the entrepreneurs are really the stars of the show and the most important people in the room. Thanks for joining us, though. Hopefully you'll find this panel as interesting and engaging as the last one. And we have some great panelists joining us today. I think all of you have heard about me and my background, so I'll spare you that for the second go-round. But I'll have my panelists each introduce themselves, starting with Iana from GE Ventures.
Thanks very much. We'll try to do this with the microphone, might be a little bit easier. So my name is Iana Dimkova. I am a director of the healthcare investing group at GE, GE being the venture capital arm of General Electric. We invest about $200 million a year. About 75 of that is in healthcare. We focus on healthcare IT for about 2/3 of our investment, and then the rest is really across non-invasive medical technologies and diagnostics. I'm really excited to be here and looking forward to the panel.
Thank you. My name is Degheest. I'm the old-timer here, I think. I'm a pioneer in what I defined health tech like 30 years ago, before anybody knew what digital health was. And so my background is I first started on the entrepreneur side and was able to get involved with several very successful companies there that changed healthcare delivery by focusing on decreasing costs instead of efficacy, like clinical outcomes. Sounds familiar nowadays, but at the time it wasn't. And then despite the fact we had saved 6 million lives and created $9 billion in market cap for 8 IPOs, every time I was I'll be part of the executive or trying to raise money, it was the same story, which is it's market risk, we cannot validate it. So out of frustration, if you're a good entrepreneur, you zig and you zag, I created my own angel group called Health Tech Capital, which is an ecosystem of angel venture and industry where we have major industry players like Genentech, Merck, Johnson & Johnson. We need to work on GE, and Philips, and we create an ecosystem there where it's more than just money. It's mentoring and opening up the ecosystem for the entrepreneur to validate their value proposition.
Hi, my name is Akhil Saklecha. I'm a partner at Artiman Ventures, which is just 6 floors straight up from here. We are an early stage venture capital group. We have just over $1 billion in total management. We're currently investing out of our 4th fund, which is roughly a $200 million fund, and we also have a growth vehicle as well. We typically invest early. The themes we look for we're sector agnostic, so we'll look at any area. Life sciences, healthcare is part of that, representing about 20%. We look for white spaces. So these are areas where there's not really any competition, where there is a wide open playing field. And we operate in very large market sizes, typically north of $10 billion from a bottoms up TAM. And so that keeps us focused on very large problems and excludes us from very viable problems, but that may not be suitable for us. My background is I'm an emergency physician, practicing over 20 years, and I still do so, very limited on a monthly basis. And I look for problems that, clinical problems that are needing to be solved, and looking for the right entrepreneurs to build those companies.
Thanks, Akhil. I have a question just to start off. I'd love to get clarification on white spaces versus moonshots.
I think that's
there's only one person on this panel.
I think white spaces are more in reality, meaning you can go for the moon, and that's great, but white spaces are areas that are here and now, or things that are just about to be developed. I'll give you an example. So we have just invested in a company around saliva diagnostics. Okay, so the play there is really going after the next generation of diagnostics. We looked at it from the patient's point of view. So if you think about any of you that are needing to get diagnostic testing, you're needing to go somewhere. Typically, you're needing to get a needle poke, or you're needing to get an X-ray. And at the end of the day, you have spent some amount of time. You may have felt some pain, and the results may or may not be available right then. It may take a day. You may need a doctor to interpret it. Now imagine if you can pivot the thinking and say, can I get to something that is truly non-invasive, truly readily available, get something that is very rapid, meaning minutes to getting that information, and multiplexing that over multiple different biomarkers for different conditions. Then imagine that you can take that out of a clinical setting where it can apply and then embed it into something like, say, a toothbrush. And getting that information on a continual basis and then being able to interpret that data to some meaningful endpoint. So that's an example of what we look at as a white space where there's not really, it's a wide open playing field, there's not really any competition there, but the play is actually very large, going from the clinical world as well into the potentially the consumer and wellness area.
Cool. Thanks for clarifying. That really helps. And for the entrepreneurs in the audience, now you know who to talk to if you have a venture, a startup that's in one of those white spaces, one of these untapped areas, less of a moonshot where the likeliness of success is relatively small, but more of a green field or an open field of opportunity that's untapped. Cool. Well, thanks for clarifying. I appreciate that. So to kick things off, I'd love to have each of you kind of just share a little bit about your really kind of your current fund thesis. What are you looking for? What are you most interested in seeing right now? And help us understand kind of what types of startups are exciting to you in this moment that we're in.
So we, especially as compared to some of the other folks on the panel, we are a later stage investor. So most of the syndicates that we actually participate in are Series B and later. So by the time that we invest in companies, they've really proven market traction. They have revenue. They have an executive team that's ready to really scale. So that's a little bit different from some of the other folks here. And I think that what we're looking for, especially in this environment, are solutions that enhance the provider experience, platforms that enable payers or even companies in the life diagnostics space to be more efficient at distributing their resources. And so I think that, I sort of call it anything that lowers costs while improving outcome is something that we will look at, but we do need to see proof that somebody's willing to pay for the solution, that it has been deployed on the post-pilot stage, and that it's really, really having an impact on a wide population base.
Great.
So we are the real risk takers. So we are, sorry, no offense.
No, it's fair.
I was talking to my banker, no, I was just kidding. So we really seed and Series A, although we have followed our companies to the B and the C, so we do support companies as they progress and then they knock on their doors. So we also focus on what is the pain point you're trying to solve. Too many people are coming to us to say, here's this cool technology you have built, especially in the Valley. And so we say, time out, who are the stakeholders? What's their pain points? What is your solution doing for them? And of course, the magic question, who is going to pay and why? In our case, we want to see a roadmap on how you're going to validate that and maybe some data points, that, we can extrapolate that there's a way to get there. There's 4 buckets on who pays in healthcare, I guess 5 buckets. It's the providers, very difficult right now. Selling cycles are extended to be on 2 years. The payers, similar problems most of the day, unless you're willing to go at risk, but it's hard to go at risk at the seed Series A because you have no data. You have the employers, very crowded, but there's a lot of activity in that space. Pharma, digital pharma is finally happening. And then there is the infamous direct-to-consumer, which nobody has figured out the business model yet. So that's what we're looking for. So we've invested in 26 companies, and that across the board, from a solution to the providers, the payers, the employers, or direct-to-consumer. So we're agnostic on, as long as you can show that somebody's willing to pay for it, and there's a value that can be validated.
So we, in a sense, when we look at, say, digital health or healthcare IT, I think we would love to see companies like Iana described, where they're farther along, where they've got a product with early revenue, and I think in specifically for digital health, that's probably something that we would have a higher bar for, and the reason is we've seen, like, I'll put my physician hat on, there is a large number of apps that are out there in healthcare. So if you look at I think the latest data I've seen is from 2016, but there's roughly about 175,000, 180,000 healthcare or medical apps. Now I'm lumping that into digital health in a way, but it's very hard to go through those apps and say what is making a meaningful difference for either the patient or for the physician. And so when we look at that, well, I don't think we're ready to invest at a super early stage. And in fact, probably looking at something where there is some early traction that's definable either on a healthcare system or with X number of doctors that are using it or X number of patients using it. Now, that being said, if we look at other areas of healthcare, we are ready to take earlier bets where we understand the technology, we understand the application and what the problem is that it's solving. And actually, I'm going to add one more maybe finer point on something Anne mentioned, which is around payers. So one thing that we've looked at maybe a little bit differently is instead of a US first market, can we look at an Asia first market? And that points more towards the self-pay population. So in the US, you have a few different barriers. You have regulatory barrier, you have physician adoption behavior, and you also have reimbursement barrier. So even if you've solved two of them, one of the other ones will still come back at you. And if you go to Asia, you still have regulatory barriers and physician adoption barriers. Reimbursement there for large chunks of population actually are self-pay. And so if you can solve the right problem and message it, you can actually get to revenue a little bit faster. Now you still need to define your clinical endpoints and what the problem you're solving and have that evidence, but that actually is something we've probably gone to with at least 4 or 5 of our healthcare companies. So we're willing to look at different business models, and I think that fundamentally, if I go back to the question, we're really looking for the biggest problems to solve within those domains.
Great, thanks, Akhil. Is the how do you guys see kind of the current regulatory and government landscape shaping your investment thesis and your decisions today? Is it causing you to hold back and hold off? Are you kind of charging ahead and unconcerned about the risk to the ACA and other changes that might be coming down the pipe?
Since this is recorded, so I think there's several buckets in the government. There is the FDA buckets, and then the FDA had a lot of uncertainty for 4 to 5 years. I think recently they have issued with the new FDA commissioner some guidance that really has changed the way they look at the space. So instead of regulating every app, which was a pure nightmare in healthcare IT, they says we're going to regulate the companies and the software developer, and that had just come out. So we have to see how good that is. But I think that's at least a step in the right directions there. Then we have the CMS, and then CMS was really changing a lot of the payment system that was driving value-based care. And the whole idea there is that in the past you had fee-for-services, which is still 80% of the payment system in the US. And now the fee-for-services system there, you have a misalignment of interest, which was creating a challenge for a lot of the entrepreneurs who tried to provide a solution that was based on decreasing cost, but you need to have an alignment of all the different constituents. Value-based care was, for example, the bundling for the hips and the knees was supposed to be pretty much everywhere for this country. There was driving a lot of the change, a lot of great applications there. That's up in the air right now. It has been put on hold. They have no longer made this mandatory, but more voluntary there. So I think the change will be coming from the provider side as opposed to the government. When you talk to people at the board level of this large healthcare system, they say we have to go towards value-based care. It's the only way that it makes sense for us to manage ourselves. So the question is, who is going to drive the bus? Is this going to be the providers and the payers, or is it going to be the government that for the last 4 or 5 years under Obamacare was really driving the changes? At the end of the day, it creates uncertainty. And the problem of uncertainty for investors is that if we invest in a seed Series A and we have no idea what it will take to validate that, then we have the B crunch, which is when they go to my friends on my left and my right, they say, well, show me the money, show me your traction. And if the providers right now are saying, we don't know how we're going to get paid, then they're being very cautious in trying pilots. The employers are really busy right now because they don't know what's going on with the exchange, and that's probably on top of their list because they're losing hundreds of millions of dollars. So they're not really doing new pilots. And then the problem right now is everybody's pivoting. There was a very interesting article. I was interviewed by the Wall Street Journal, I think in in May or June, saying that a lot of entrepreneurs are pivoting, which is always a dangerous term, towards selling to the employers. And it's another way to say they couldn't figure out how to sell it to the providers and the payers. So I think the challenge in the space is uncertainty means people are increasing the bar to get funding. You have to decrease the market risk. And that's kind of the challenge I see in the space right now.
Got it. Iana.
So I think I rarely say show me the money because I don't think I have enough charm to pull it off, but I think it. So that's right. So I think that if you look 7 months back, we had sort of consultants who were reporting to us on a daily basis the progress that was being made on the Hill in terms of some of the regulation that was under review. And I think that what we realize over time is that as Anne just explained, there are things that are unlikely to change. The transition to value-based care, although right now fee-for-service still very much dominates, it can be anywhere to 98% for some hospitals. Healthcare can't possibly become 40% of GDP, right? So something has to change. And so we believe that transition will continue to take place. I think that what we are concerned about are some of the payment models and mechanisms that were passed, right? So MACRA passed with bipartisan support. And if you have been reading closely over the last month, there's very much an indication that although it will not be repealed, it's being slowed down. There are more and more exemptions to the rules. There's definitely more caveats. And so when you see that, you start to think to yourself, well, how does that have an impact on the provider sector, right? Does that actually slow the transition to value-based care? Because those drivers are not going to be as significant as they were before. I think where we actually do see short-term impact because of some of the volatility that you described are really companies that are going after the kind of the payer space and specifically after the Medicaid population, because we do believe that there are going to be cuts to Medicaid independent of which payer it actually affects because of the fact that we don't really have certainty yet as to what happens a couple of years from now. So overall, it's a lot of uncertainty, but I do think the opportunity is there, and I think that a lot of investors realize that they can't sit on the sidelines and they have to continue to back solutions, and so we're in that camp.
Yeah, I actually I think from our perspective, that uncertainty is an issue for us if we were to look at the healthcare payment space, and so we're probably one of the few groups that are staying on the sidelines for that. I think in general, if you talk to any physician, we all want to provide the best care that we can, and while fee for service exists, absolutely, and there are physicians that they do look at the top line and bottom line of what they're doing and how many procedures they're doing, which are driving up revenue for them. For the most part, most physicians don't think like that. They're actually thinking, what's best for the patient. And by the way, when there is a procedure, they do benefit from that. But I think if you look at when they're making choices about testing that's needed or procedures that are being that need to get done, they are mitigating it a bit by saying what is the true cost of the system, what is the true benefit to the patient, and if it's really beneficial for the patient, it's something that most physicians will support. I mean, and then the checks and balance of that is usually from the payer side, whether it's insurance or Medicare, Medicaid. Now, that being said, I think the current administration, it's still very uncertain. Just like on a day-to-day basis, you can see that there's things that are changing on a very frequent basis. But in healthcare, I think in general, it seems like there's a little bit more willingness from the FDA on the regulatory side to be more open and maybe a little bit more transparent. I think the latest stuff that's come out says that they are, for at least on digital health, they are willing to actually get involved earlier and get involved in some certification process, which enables entrepreneurs a little bit to remove some of that uncertainty. Now, it's a toss-up right now as to how that evolves, but I think it's one of those things where if you look at the news on any given day or week, you're starting to see a little bit more openness there. But we don't know yet.
Just to be controversial, because that's what they asked me to do. I think the big picture really worry that we have is that I think that there's 35 countries that, with Europe and the western of the world, 34 of them have what's called, single-payer system. And in this country, if you look at the statistic, it's really worrisome. 71% of Americans cannot find $1,000 in cash. They have to borrow or use a credit card at a 25% interest rate. Now, over 50% of families now have a deductible over $1,000. The only thing we know for sure, that deductible is going up, and the copay is going up. Some of the proposals that were on the bill that didn't happen but could happen again, as high as a deductible of $12,000 to $13,000. What it means is that if you think about the births in this country, there's 4 million births per year. Half of them are Medicaid. A third of the patients in California are Medi-Cal, which is the California Medicaid. And a lot of the solution that you're developing, you're going to have to segment, I hate to say that, your population target there, because who is going to pay for those payers, for those patients there? And the medical bankruptcy is going to be growing up and up. So fintech in healthcare is going to be really interesting, because we have this segment of the population that is going to be really hard to sell to, or somebody's going to be not willing to pick up the bill. And that has an impact in the market sizes and the value proposition of a lot of startups.
That is a lot of complexity, a lot of challenge, a lot of controversy in everything that Anne just said. As a startup, you always aspire to serve the entire population, and you're hearing some very practical advice that you might have to really think about, how you serve and cater to the end customer through the enterprises that you're offering your solutions to. Why don't we switch gears for a moment and talk a little bit about kind of entrepreneurs and the types of entrepreneurs that you guys are most attracted to and like to see. And I know we're going to get 3 very different perspectives here, which is great. So what do you look for in an entrepreneur? And, if, when you find it and you see that spark, how do you convince them to work with you?
Go first.
Yeah.
Well, no, I'm always first. So
Yeah, I think in general, most of us would agree. I think that we're looking for a passionate entrepreneur and somebody who has ideally significant domain expertise in the problem that they're solving. I think the maybe one thing that we'll look at from Artiman's point of view is sometimes we'll actually be willing to take a bet on an entrepreneur from a different space. So say a tech entrepreneur who's now engaged in healthcare, with the caveat that entrepreneur knows how to segment and understand the problem that's at hand. So if there's a clinical problem, is it the right problem that is wanting to be solved? Is all the other things that fall into place, whether the technology will work, whether the market will be ready to adopt it, whether there be regulatory reimbursement barriers. But fundamentally for that team and that entrepreneur, we're looking for this right mix of passion and drive and expertise, ability to build a business, ability really to build an early stage business and then help grow it. Now, that entrepreneur doesn't necessarily need to go through all phases of that company. I think at the earliest stages, they really need to be able to build and message the company, understand the clinical problem. And that is in the space of digital health and really almost any segment, it is more than half of the equation. So we've made mistakes at our firm and in terms of thinking that we could mentor the entrepreneur or that the entrepreneur would grow into it, and it's always been something where we look back and we're like, well, maybe we didn't look at it in the right way. But anytime we've found the right team, and that right when you meet them, we will try our best to really connect with the entrepreneur and really work with them to show how we can help them. I think that's the part when you feel that you've met that special entrepreneur. It's a connection that you can't. It's hard to describe in a way. You just kind of know it and you feel it, and and it's something where there's a connection, and it's kind of indescribable in a way. And I'm sure we've all felt it, and I would hope that the entrepreneurs feel it sometimes when they've met the right investor, where there's a connection that occurs that's just beyond just what you're talking about and the problem. There's a real connection at a cerebral level about the problem that's being solved and how that investor can help.
So in addition, I'm really, after I've invested in 38 companies, I've had my moment of glory and humility, to say the least. And I think at the end of the day, healthcare is so complicated that there's no way one person can know it all. And so what I've learned is really looking at two things. One is kind of this passionate commitment there to go through hell, and then convince people to follow them to go through hell. And in digital health, it's all about market risk. It's all about creation of market. There is no roadmap. It's not like in traditional medtech where you get the product to work, you for the FDA, you convince the key opinion leaders, and then the market is waiting for you. So you have to get what's called flexibility of the mind. And that's the ability to take feedback and input from multiple opinions, which could be your team, it could be the investors or the market says, and adjust and correct. It's this ability of being persistent but not stubborn. And very often the difference is usually found between failures and success afterwards. Is that ability to be mentally curious and be courageous and make the decision and adjust and correct as you learn more data points. It's more important to move the ball, make a decision, learn new things, than to analyze things to death. And I think in the Valley, we have a lot of engineers who have a tendency to analyze things to death. At times, it's just, you go out there and you're totally open-minded there to say, okay, I don't have all the data, I made a decision, it was the best I got, and I want feedback. I want ways to adjust and correct. There's no direct line to success. It's all a zigzag, up and down.
Very true.
So I think one thing that folks don't really talk about a lot is the fact that this is a relationship between an investor and the startup is it's like a long marriage, and it sometimes you can be in the company for 10, 12 years, and I think what folks don't realize is how important it is to have integrity on both sides, because there are going to be issues, and if you are backing an entrepreneur who is not honest, things really come up and they can go very wrong. And so I think one of the things we talk about as we get closer to making an investment is that, have we actually figured out whether that person has been honest with us? And everybody exaggerates, and that's fine. But when you talk to their customers, when you talk to their employees, do you get the sense that that's how they hold up this person? Because it's really, really important. There are going to be pivots. There are going to be huge failures. You're going to be sitting in board meetings saying, how didn't I see this? But it's really great if you're doing it with somebody who you trust immensely, that they have your best interest in hand and just swipe the other way. Because we are going to be wrong most of the time. It's just true. It's how the math works out. But hopefully we get to be wrong with people we actually respect and admire. That's, I think, to me, is the most important thing. The second thing is, and I'm still shocked by this, is I think sometimes entrepreneurs really prepare for a pitch. They really prepare to make sure they understand their business model and their financials, and they get who their customers are and can just spit out these details in a second. What they don't prepare for is sort of who else is in the room. So I have 5 colleagues. They're all fantastic, but they all have very, very different focus areas. And so if you go on our website, you look at their investments, and if you figure out which one should be your target, that should be the focus of your pitch, and you'll see their eyes sparkle and light up, and you've got your champion, and that's who you're there to sell to. People should like you, but you just need that one person who's going to lead the deal. And it's really surprising to me that people don't really do that. And I just think that's why you end up with entrepreneurs that perhaps don't choose the right investor when they have choices. And then suddenly they get surprised a couple years down the road that maybe the expertise wasn't there, or maybe the pockets weren't as deep, or maybe they just weren't as interested in the space and they changed their mind. But if you just do a little bit of that work at the beginning, I think it really goes a long way. And again, just prepare. This is a 10-year battle. So just prepare yourself. I went on like a war tangent. I didn't mean to, but
No, it's great. It's great.
No feelings here.
Yeah, well, hopefully, I mean, it's. I would say that it's more like a short marriage than a long marriage, because 10 or 12 years, that should be a short one, I'd hope. But
that's a fair point. That's a honeymoon part.
Not if you go public.
That's just the honeymoon phase. Yeah, that's the first 15 years, right? Yeah. So, but I think I agree with a lot of the comments and the sentiment here. I think we heard some interesting points about the passion and the drive and the expertise. Points about integrity really being key, the honesty, the transparency, the openness of that entrepreneur and the investor, because they are going to be in that relationship for a long time and they have to trust each other. That's the most important thing. We heard a little bit about kind of the entrepreneur mindset, the flexibility of the entrepreneur's mind, their ability to take feedback and adapt. Not necessarily listen to all of the feedback, but kind of process it and in a thoughtful way. We heard a little bit about, kind of velocity, just taking action and moving forward. Sometimes it's okay to fail or make mistakes along the way, but you have to keep the ball moving. And so a lot of really good, points there for the entrepreneurs in the audience, and hopefully it gives you a sense of what each of the panelists here are looking for when you approach them. Personally, I'm looking for entrepreneurs that are building great businesses, but also have a passion to make the world a better place at the same time. I often find that entrepreneurs that kind of have that simultaneous dual commitment to creating an impact in a positive way are so mission driven that they have a no quit kind of attitude, and they're going to persevere and fight through every challenge that comes in front of them. But beyond that, for us, trust is paramount. We have to trust the entrepreneur. We have to believe in them and believe in what they're saying. We want to drink some of that Kool-Aid right alongside the entrepreneur, and you have to get your investor to drink that Kool-Aid with you, to kind of be along for that journey and ride. So, the passion, the charisma, all of that is critical to getting people to join you on your journey. If each of you had one piece of advice to give to an entrepreneur, to help them raise money from you, right? To aside from all the things we've already covered, what's that piece of advice? Is it advice about the pitch? Is it advice about kind of the network, the relationships, or answering some fundamental part of their business plan first? Why don't we start with the middle this time? Let's start with Anne.
Ooh, so many advice. I think that in my experience, and this is Sam Kalela from IVP, when I was starting my own company, he says, think big. Because if you undershoot, it's still big enough. and I didn't fully get that until, I went through a few startup myself. I think that you need to spend more time on the pain point from the viewpoint of the stakeholders. First, ask yourself, who are the stakeholders? In healthcare, the user may be different than that percent that prescribes, and the percent that pays, that percent that authorizes. I mean, there's like maybe 5 or 6 stakeholders. And I think if you really feel and understand why it is a pain point and the misalignment, the conflict of interest there is at times from these different stakeholders there, then the solution becomes much more obvious. Not only that, but then the features versus the benefits also becomes very different. And at the end of the day, people don't buy technology, they buy solutions to their pain points. So I think that would be my advice. We see too many people there who've talked to 1 or 2 stakeholders there, they have this cool technology and they're out there selling a product. And I say, we don't invest in product. We invest in solutions and businesses that solve problems that somebody's willing to pay for. And so I think that'd be my advice, because healthcare is so complicated that to really spend more time understanding who are the players, what's their power plays, and how can you drive them, and how can you align all their interests with your product definition.
Well, I really like kind of the point you made about aiming very high, going for the moonshot, so to speak. gets you typically a lot farther than you might otherwise have gone. When I was in 7th grade, my math teacher always would ask me, like, Ajay, you're always, trying too hard. You're always shooting for the moon. I said, no, actually, I'm aiming for the sun. That's what I'd say, because if I aim for the sun, I might get to the moon. So I called it a sun shot back then. I didn't realize that moonshot would be a term someday, but I think sunshot's a way better term, so I would go with that.
I don't like the word moonshot because moonshot is a low technical probability.
Yeah, well, I always thought being a moonshot was terrible because if you miss, you're just going to be in orbit. You're going to be floating in outer space. You're
lost in planet Mars. No, my view was that it was interesting. I was invited at an event at a tech museum there with all these big name Silicon Valley leaders, and they ask you to define yourself with one word. So ask yourself, how would you define yourself with one word? And then they were taking a picture of you and they posted them. And in my case, I came up with fearless. And the reason I was fearless is because, think about it. I mean, here's a woman living in Belgium, decided to go to Harvard Business School, having the Belgium and the American government paying for it. And every time I've been told all my life, you should never do this. And I just say, what's the downside? The downside is that they say no, and then I'll figure something else. And so I discovered that, shoot high, and people will start helping you, but you have to believe that you can shoot high. And that's my point. Too many people say this cool product there. I disagree with the prior panelist earlier. Basically says steal it from somebody else, copy it, and then you figure this out. I think that's insane, but that's just me. I think if you shoot high, then you can zig and zag because the market is forgiving. The reason I was successful in all this company before is because we are the only player we could build a barrier of entry in creating the market rules. We define the market. You drive the market. Market leadership is that you define the rules of engagement, and therefore you have a competitive advantage because you designed them. You can only do that if you go after a very big market. In our case, we created a market that didn't exist. So you define the rules. That's what I'm saying.
Cool. We're going to get to one of the comments you made about the entrepreneurs and their take on VCs in a minute, but Iana.
So I think Ajay and did a great job of sort of what you want to have as a mission. I'll try to perhaps address a little bit of more of like sort of the practical day-to-day, and then we'll leave the rest to our the third panelist. So I think that what's really important, going back to sort of the being prepared notion I mentioned before, that I think investors are impressed by folks who realize that there's very limited number of hours in the day, that you are always bombarded by folks asking for money, who have a lot of passion and who have great ideas. And so you just need to differentiate yourself. And so the way you do that is by showing that you have done a little bit of homework, because you're asking the investor to actually spend their time evaluating you, right? So usually kind of the cold emails I get, which are not the ones that I think are very successful, are, hey, I am doing something in the veterinary space. Okay, so if you go to our website, you will see a couple of things. We don't invest in seed companies. We don't invest in drug companies. We don't invest in drug delivery companies. We don't invest in the veterinary space, right? So it's very clear from the portfolio, from what the investors do, that those are just not areas we cover. But you could just take it the other way, which is that if you are an investor, if you are a company and you have a seed stage product, what you can do is say, look, I know, it's really nice to meet you. I know this isn't right for you because it's too early. But I would love some feedback because I think this is a huge opportunity, and here's everything I've been doing and why I think you guys would be a great partner for us at the Series B. That is a phenomenal intro. Like, that is the intro where I take the time, I email them. There's an entrepreneur that did that a month ago. She came into the office. I met with her. I was about to give her my own money. Like, I actually wanted to hand her my wallet. And there was no way we're going to look at that company for another 3 years, right? But she was prepared. She was very driven. But again, she just took the right approach where she had just done some homework on the firm. So I just highly encourage folks to do that, because you get this one chance. And if you make a positive impression, people will talk to you, and they are willing to back you and give you a chance, but just try to do it the right way.
And last but not least, so you know what? One of the things that I really like with entrepreneurs is someone who's very articulate. Now, I don't mean in a technical sense, but someone who can message and communicate extremely well, because I think it really talks a lot about that given individual. So if you can take a very complex subject and bring it down a notch and explain it, because I'll tell you, as an emergency physician, one of the good things about me is I understand a lot about breadth of medicine, but if you were to poke in specific depth areas, I need to learn a lot. So if I'm talking to someone about something in the neurological space that I don't understand, if that entrepreneur can really explain it and dumb it down a little for me to say, this is the problem that we're solving, and this is why my technical solution or my solution is the right way to address this problem, that means a lot. And that shows that not only can that individual, message it to me, but it shows a lot about how that person thinks, how that person is organized, and how they can message it. And if they can message to me, they can probably message it to, potential future team members, other investors, and customers. And so that's a very important quality that I look for.
That's great feedback. Really keeping things kind of understandable is particularly important, especially in the fields of healthcare and med tech. It's such a wide array of opportunity and technology that no single investor is going to understand or know everything about your specific area of specialization. So don't go in assuming that they're going to get it right away or they're going to understand your specialty area. Aid in that understanding by keeping things really articulate, as Akhil was saying, and focusing on the message, how you explain it and make your story accessible. Some of the other feedback that I think you guys heard that is probably useful to just summarize again is how busy VCs are. I think this is probably my number one ask of entrepreneurs is make it easy for us, right? Figure out a way to get your message across in as short and digestible of a format as possible so that, we can get the gist, understand if it's of interest or a fit to us. That not only saves our time, but it also saves your time as well. So you're not chasing the wrong VC or barking up the wrong tree, so to speak. Do the most you can to kind of keep your initial kind of intro and ask as pithy and short and sweet as you can. And then we also heard about the idea of aiming high and kind of thinking big about your business and your opportunity. The reason that's so important, I think you heard it a few times on the panel today. I think Akhil mentioned that they're looking for companies in the white space that can, reach potentially $10 billion in terms of addressable or available market. Am I stating that correctly? Was that you were looking for, right? So and why so big? Why 10?
Can I address?
Yeah, please go for it.
The reason we pick a number and 10 billion is it wasn't necessarily picked out of the hat, but if you aim extremely high, there's going to be whatever direction you initially head out in is usually not the direction where you end up at, and you end up, and we've used the word pivot here a few times before, and you end up changing directions, and the model may change. Hopefully the technology doesn't, but there's so many different things, and if you are playing enough in a big enough market where the revenue of that company has the potential for 10 billion, even if things change, you're still going to be in a massive market. And you're not, if you're playing in a market of $1 billion and all of a sudden things change and that market size is now half of that, that means that even as a market leader, the most you can really hope to obtain as a revenue of that company is 100 million or 150 million, which makes it really small for a venture investor. But if you're in a 10 billion plus market, even if you change directions and end up in a $5 billion market, you can still make a significant impact as a company.
Absolutely, yeah. And so, the venture economics are actually an important thing for you as an entrepreneur to understand and know. So spend some time educating yourself on that, because if you aren't VC compatible, is a nice way of saying it, you might have more success raising from other types of investment sources, including grant money or other or other avenues. Because in order to be VC compatible, you have to be able to generate a return that is substantial enough to enable the VC to return the majority of their fund off of your investment alone. So that's an important thing to consider. And so knowing the size of the fund and and kind of your profile and potential for return often colors whether or not your particular startup is a good fit for the fund you're talking to.
Yeah, and I think there's a lot of different investors. There's not one type of VC. You've met one VC, you've met one VC. Is that you can build a very successful company, but you have to be aligned with these investors. On their website, these people say in order for them to be worth their time of investing, because their funds are so large, they have to invest 10 to 30 to 40 million dollars over the life of the company. If you have to invest 10 to 40 million dollars and you need multiple VC because they like syndication there, by definition you have to go after a very large market to justify those investments. There are other ways to also get other type of investor. There's micro VC, there's group of angels there, where you have a $30 million exit, and we're extremely happy with a $4 million investment. That will not be of interest to them. So you have to do your homework about what is your exit strategy, what's the money it takes to get there, and who are the investors aligned with those strategies. It doesn't make any sense to go to a G Venture or an Artiman if you think you can get profitable. I mean, some of my company got profitable the Series B, and that's your business model. So we still had a $1 billion exit, but we didn't need $50 million to get there. In other cases, you don't have a choice because the regulatory forces you there.
I think the other thing is that so the worst part of my job is saying no. And I, unfortunately, I get to say it all the time. And
Say 97%
we're in the
of
business
time.
of saying no, people. We're in the business of saying no.
It's just, and it's awful. And you get to say no to people who are passionate, who are solving real problems. For example, right now, and Anne knows this better than anybody, there's a dearth of sort of investment going into med tech, right? Because of the regulatory issues and just how hard reimbursement has been. And I think that's horrible because in a couple of years, we're going to wake up and there's not going to be any innovation because no one is funding it. So I get these pitches and they're for these products that are truly life-changing. And I have to say no because it's not within their fund parameters. And so just understand that because don't get discouraged by it. Just understand why you're being told no. Is it because it doesn't fit the fund, or is it maybe that somebody's seeing maybe a flaw with the business model, a flaw with the product? Because I've been on the operating side. I've raised money when the company was doing really well and everyone said yes, and we had our choice of investors. And when the company wasn't doing well, when we got turned down by something like 47 firms. So just don't get discouraged, and just try to see the feedback as what it is and have your actions be guided by it.
Great feedback. So we touched on this issue that I think a couple times now of how hard it is to get money as an entrepreneur, and in particular in categories like medtech, where it seems like the funding well is drying up or maybe already bone dry. What advice can you guys offer to entrepreneurs that are facing those challenges and those struggles? Oftentimes you'll hear entrepreneurs complaining about how VCs talk about sunshots and moonshots and aiming high. But then when it comes down to the pitch and the meeting and actually raising money, they feel like they're being told to go copy someone else's plan, as we heard on the entrepreneur panel this morning, and do something that has immediate market traction, generates immediate revenue, shows that immediate milestone. So how does an entrepreneur help the entrepreneurs in the audience kind of reconcile that reality that they're facing? On one end, they feel like they've got to, deliver on this immediate traction, and on the other end, they're being told that they should be aiming high.
I think to expand it, I think you need to find out why you got turned down. And one of the things we do is when people pitch to us at Health Tech Capital, the screening and due diligence, we give them the raw feedback of our members. And then we'll say on the average, 50% of the time, the feedback they got is that we didn't get their story. And when they come back to us, they say, this is not what we meant. They say, okay, you have a communication problem, which is fixable. If you figure out why, there's some issues about the ability for them to articulate their story. And at the time we coach them and we mentor them, and we have invested in certain cases. So I think it's very important when you get turned on, you say, thank you for your time, and also tell me why. Now, most of them may not, but some will. And they appreciate the fact that you're asking for the feedback. And if you find out that we perceive that the product risk was too high, or the market risk was too high, or there were some people with the management team, or the funding plan doesn't make any sense, take that into consideration and learn from why they're turning you down. Ask for it. You may not get it from all of them, but most people are trying to help. It's an ecosystem. So as far as the medtech, that's the tough one. I have a lot of scars and lost a lot of money in medtech for all the wrong reasons. I think the problem of the medtech is the venture industry has been wiped out. And there's like 6 of the very big firms, the NEA, the Kleiner Perkins, and they are, without mentioning names, they're all doing pay to play and wipeout. And because they can make a nice investment return that way, and then as the angels, when you have done enough of those for the wrong reasons, you don't play anymore, because there's no money coming behind us. I just had a discussion with somebody who had a great product there, but it's a really big challenge. The second problem in medtech is not only the investors, the exit strategy. As the industry has consolidated and Medtronic has purchased a lot of the mid-sized players there, there's only maybe 1 or 2 bidders. And so we invest, I used to be part of Life Science Angel, we invest in a lot of medtech companies. We thought you just go for the regulatory, you get the key opinion leaders, and then they'll buy you out. They don't come. And now you have to raise more money, which is really hard to do, to go to the market, because that's very expensive there. In one case, our company went out in Australia. That was the only way we can get funding. So, ironically, Australia does a lot of medtech IPOs, but you need to have a product on the market by that stage. So you have to be creative. So we're not going to change that market right away. And I'm mentoring some company from Israel and say, forget the US, go straight to Europe. It's much easier to get approval, get some sales. The key opinion leaders are very well respected in the world, and get some sales there, sell the company, and let the American figure what to do with the US market.
Yeah, I think for us in general, the exits on the medtech side are far and few between, and I think I think the question's more oriented around the entrepreneur towards the investor. The
Sure.
one thing I would say is put yourself in the investor's seat for a second and understand the pressures they have that we have, right? And so we're beholden to our limited partners to return some multiple of the amount of money that they invested. And so when we look at investments, we're trying to look at the opportunities where we're always going to have risk, right? I mean, that's what we do. We invest in risk, but we're trying to mitigate that risk where we can. And so when we look at businesses and entrepreneurs and teams that we want to invest in, we're trying to find the right mix of ingredients that will allow us to build a company together that will get to that maximum inflection point and exit. But to be honest, on the medtech side, and we're probably the fact that we're still doing diagnostics in a time period where many won't do diagnostics. It's something we're very well aware of as a risk that we have, which is we can build a great company, but it may not have an exit. So how do we sustain that company, and how do we get to a point where it can get to that inflection point? Now, but getting back to the point around what can we do, or what can we tell the entrepreneur about what we're thinking? About a given company, it's something where I like to say I'm good at, but I know I'm not always good at, which is to get that feedback back or to close the loop with an entrepreneur. And I think that it stems from sometimes not even being sure yet, is this a deal or not a deal? Is this something that we want to follow along with the entrepreneur? Is this something that is truly a pass? And oftentimes what I'll do, actually sometimes even during the meeting when I know it's not a fit, is I'll talk to the entrepreneur right then and tell them why it may not be a deal for us, but it doesn't mean it still can't be a successful company. It may not just meet the needs of what my firm is looking for, but that there's an opportunity to still build a company. And sometimes if I can understand how I can help that entrepreneur, I'll give him my 2 cents on maybe what they should think about doing. but I think in general, I like to give feedback when I can, when I clearly understand why I'm passing. But sometimes, it's a feeling I get, and I can't quite articulate it. Getting back to my own messaging, but it's something where I just know it's not a fit, and that's all I can really say is it's something where it's not really a fit for what we're trying to do at Artiman.
Completely understand. Know all of those feelings and kind of emotions when it comes to looking at a deal. Sometimes it is just a gut, kind of reaction. Well, I think we're almost out of time. I just want to open it up for one or two audience questions. If you have specific questions for any of the panelists about their funds or how they might help you. We have one in the back. You might need to speak up.
So my question is that when you make a decision on investment trigger point, how do you weigh the cross point between almost getting revenue or just not enough on just getting the revenue? How do you make a decision?
Sorry, if you don't mind repeating it, just because it was a little bit hard to hear.
Okay, so the question is that during your investment trigger point, decision trigger point, how do you weigh whether to invest or not based on a company that's almost at the edge trying to get revenue but start running out of steam money, or they're at a point that they're just about getting revenue but still have some money and go through with it?
So this is really more of kind of a timing question around.
Yes, it is.
When is it optimal for you to raise?
Or the decision point for the VC says, okay, you're stuck with no money now, but you're at this cross point. Are you going to do it or not? Or you just say, figure out your way to show us revenue, or say, okay, I'll go with you.
Oh, I see what you're saying. So would we invest in a company that's pre-revenue, basically?
Yeah.
Or do we want to wait until there is some revenue? It really depends, I think, for the stage of the funds here. Some funds focus on those seed and early stage investments where you can be pre-revenue, pre-product market fit. And other funds are going to want to see that incredibly well established, like a corporate venture arm. They're going to want to know that there's not only product market fit, but that you're ready to scale. So, which would presume that you'd have revenue at that point. So I think it's going to vary based on the stage. But my feedback to you as an entrepreneur is, you have to raise money at the right inflection points in your own business. When do you need the money so that you can keep going on your mission and so that you don't run out of cash? And there's an art to doing that pre-revenue and pre-traction. And a lot of that is in getting people to believe in you and to buy into your journey. And you have to be able to convince an investor that, you're worthy of their time and their money at that stage. So I think, you have to raise for when it's right for you. And hopefully you'll find investors that are willing to come along for the ride at the right points in time. Any other questions?
So for any of you, what might be 3 or 4 of the biggest pain points that would be most attractive to you to go for?
I'll tell you one idea that I was wrestling around with the other day. So I'm actually going back to I'm putting my physician hat on. So I was working in the ER last week, and one of the problems I always have is when I'm discharging a patient and I'm giving them a prescription. A lot of times, if it's a new condition, there's some pre-formatted instructions about what the patient should do. But when it's a new medical condition that has chronic implications or something there that it just needs a little bit extra, what I would really like is something where I have I'm going to use platform, although it's probably a better word, but where I can have something where it's prescribe an app. Okay. So there's a bunch of apps, like I mentioned, but I don't necessarily know which is the best of breed, which is the ones that are scientifically backed with a ton of evidence. And if there is something to say, hey, I've got a patient that I've just diagnosed with diabetes, and I need to give them something about some education or something about what they should be doing, for the next week or two until they get in to see their doctor, I don't know if I can pull something off the shelf that would say, this is what they should be doing. We have instructions, but they're terrible. And so what you really want is to say that, hey, this is an app for somebody with diabetes, and this is proven by, all the different evidence and supported by the American Society of Endocrinology and internal medicine. And for my ability then is to say, I'm going to take that app and write a prescription for it and give it to the patient so that they know this is the app I should follow. And you can do that for any other medical conditions. And the same thing extends not just in the ER, but in other practices. And there's nothing that exists like that. And it's a big pain point, for every physician, because we don't really know how to connect that app to a patient. And so hence, there's this actual, when you have a conversation with your physician, they'll say, yeah, there's some apps out there, and this may be one or this may be another, but there's nothing there that they can actually push out. Now, Aetna and Optum from United are trying to work on that problem because they're willing to pay actually for these type of apps, but they need all that scientific backing. And so that's a problem that I see where it faces me and other physicians all the time.
So I think the big opportunity in healthcare is going after what's called digital therapeutics, which is how do we provide a total solution to get people to change behavior. And, you have the famous Omada Health, Livongo Health, and all of that. But the good news, there's a lot of chronic conditions in healthcare. You don't have to go after just diabetes or pre-diabetes there, but you have to provide an integrated solution there that may have some sensor, and they're being commoditized. Getting the data over the clouds, because you have to follow the patient wherever he is, which is at home typically most of the time. You have to get some smart algorithms, because the doctor don't want to know how many steps you do every day. They just want to know when it's relevant. And actionable insights. And then this is the key, behavioral science, so that you have a coach that does an intervention that's unique for each of you, so that ultimately at the end you change behavior. That is how we're going to basically start really moving the patients to own their disease and start changing behavior. There's only a few companies who have that all integrated there. These are the ones who start publishing clinical papers so that you can be educated about it. I think just an app is not enough. That's just a piece of the equation there. What you have to do is to treat the patient as a consumer. The patients behave, consumers want choices. They want to do things that makes them feel good about what they do. We need to start behaving the way Apple and Google and all those guys come into the space there, because they know how to sell to the consumers, because they know how to affect your emotions and your behavior.
Some really have the chance to do this because I feel like I've been sort of the practical one talking about kind of the step-by-step process, and here I can truly go for that's
Go
right.
for
I
it.
was
Go
trying to
for it,
think
Iana.
of what's further than the sun, but I was going to get everything wrong. So my holy grails and healthcare's holy grails at the moment, interoperability, first and foremost. $20 billion later, we still have EHRs that don't talk to each other. We've looked at a ton of companies. I'd love to find something that works. Pharmacy benefit managers, it's a really broken space. There's a ton of opportunities. Employers are begging for solutions that help them manage, especially now they have patients and all these very, very sophisticated drugs on the specialty side. And finally, I think that clinical trial management, anything from patient enrollment to actually keeping the patient enrolled, to following through with data, especially as where the patient is actually getting the drug and how they're getting a drug, that's changing tremendously because of what's happening on the therapeutic side. So I think those three are what I aim for and what I wake up thinking about. So
Nice. Those are good ones. I was just mentioning to one of the other startups in the room earlier about how I'm still waiting to find more AI, machine learning types of startups in healthcare that can gain insights from the data that's already out there. There's so much data available that I think there's incredible mining opportunities. Anne just brought up the example of diabetes as a data point. There's, I think, tremendous opportunities around improving diabetic care just off of all of the data that we're already collecting around diabetes, from finger sticks to laboratory diagnostics. And so it will be interesting to see what next generation class of startups emerge that uses AI to improve patient outcomes. Another example of that would be that old 1980s infomercial, if any of you remember it, "I've fallen and I can't get up." Yeah, you're right. I remember that infomercial all too well. Probably watched way too much TV as a kid in the 80s, pre-internet. So I would love to see a startup tackle a problem like that. Falling is the second largest cause of accidental injury and death. So when you have a big problem like that affects 155 million Americans a year, seems like a white space that should be tackled by an entrepreneur that might be able to build a wearable or some form of monitoring to predict when someone's going to fall and warn the patient, the wearer, or the family, or the healthcare provider, or the elder care center, or whatever, to avoid those accidental injuries. So, I mean, like that, you can find hundreds of very interesting, compelling examples that that VCs are waiting to be pitched on, and just haven't seen the pitch yet. So, if any of you are working on that or want to work on that, let me know. Awesome. Well, thanks everyone for your time today.